Let's jump right into this explainer, because right now there is a massive, high-stakes showdown playing out in Washington. We're talking about a brand new federal transparency initiative aimed at tracking down and punishing the misuse of your taxpayer dollars. It's led to this highly publicized public ledger and, interestingly enough, a really bitter political standoff in the Senate. Let's get right into it. $230 billion. Yeah, you heard that right. That is the massive estimate of taxpayer fraud uncovered by the administration's new anti-fraud task force since January of 2025. Just to put that into perspective, that is literally more than the entire gross domestic product of several countries. It's a staggering amount of money, and the sheer scale of this alleged misuse is really the catalyst for the whole government-wide crackdown we're unpacking today.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're hitting the Camp David rollout, tracking the billions, doing an agency-by-agency breakdown, looking at wider government crackdowns, and wrapping up with the anti-weaponization standoff.
All right, Part 1, the Camp David rollout.
The public debut for all of this happened on Friday, July 31st, 2026, and it wasn't your standard press briefing. It was a live-streamed cabinet meeting straight from Camp David, which is usually a highly private presidential retreat. Vice President JD Vance, who's actually leading this task force, took the mic and announced these massive findings directly to the public. He stated, "We have identified $230 billion of fraud, and we have halted $56 billion. He also made sure to specifically thank his partners on this, folks like HHS Secretary RFK Jr., SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler, and VA Secretary Douglas Collins.
What's wild here is how fast this all moved. Remember Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOJ? Well, that wound down in January 2026 after reporting around $215 billion in savings. Right after that, in early 2026, this new task force was formed. Fast forward to the July 31st Camp David meeting, and then literally less than a week later on August 6th, the official White House Fraud Ledger website actually went live.
Now, during that televised Camp David meeting, President Donald Trump weighed in pretty heavily. He called the corruption under the previous Biden administration unprecedented. But what really caught folks' attention was that he didn't just keep it focused on the federal level. He specifically singled out 3 states, Minnesota, California, and Maine, identifying them as having the highest levels of corruption, kind of tying these national losses to very specific geographies.
Okay, Part 2, tracking the billions. So on August 6th, the administration launched whitehouse.gov/fraud. And to really grasp what this ledger is doing, we have to look at the 3 very distinct buckets they're using to categorize this money. First up, you have fraud uncovered. That's the estimated fraud identified through data analysis, currently sitting somewhere between $229 and $230 billion. Next is fraud stopped, which counts the money saved through administrative actions, roughly $56 to $56.4 billion. And finally, fraud enforced, which represents actual dollars recovered through things like legal settlements or fines, currently sitting at exactly $55.5 billion.
Now, you might be wondering, why so much emphasis on the stopped bucket? Well, Vice President Vance hit on a pretty harsh reality of how government works. Trying to reclaim funds once they are already, quote, out the door is just a brutally difficult uphill battle. Because of that, the task force is making early prevention their absolute top priority, trying to catch fraudulent payments before they ever get dispersed in the first place.
Moving on to Part 3, agency by agency breakdown. If you look across the entire federal government, this fraud isn't spread evenly. It's actually heavily concentrated. Administrator Kelly Loeffler's Small Business Administration, the SBA, is leading the pack by a mile, identifying $122 billion in fraud. Then you have the Department of Health and Human Services coming in at $96.2 billion, and a bit further down, the Department of Labor at $7 billion.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because identifying fraud is just step 1, right? Enforcing it is a totally different ballgame. Take the HHS, led by Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They've actually stopped the largest actual dollar amount, $46.1 billion, and enforced another $30.5 billion. On the flip side, look at the SBA. Despite having the absolute highest amount of uncovered fraud, they've only stopped about $1.3 billion, though they did manage to enforce $22.6 billion. It really shows how different government bureaucracies are having totally different success rates when it comes to actually clawing this cash back.
Section 4. Wider government crackdowns.
Now, this whole initiative goes way beyond just one task force. Vice President Vance actually wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post on August 5th calling for a whole-of-government approach, and we're seeing that happen right now in real time. For example, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent rolled out a screening system that has already stopped nearly $100 million in scheduled payments going out to deceased individuals. Meanwhile, over at the DOJ, Colin McDonald's National Fraud Enforcement Division recently uncovered $350 million in alleged food stamp, or SNAP, fraud down in the Southeast. Oh, and they've got 17 more anti-fraud directives teed up, which are expected to save another $300 million.
And finally, Part 5, the anti-weaponization standoff.
Okay, so here's the catch in all of this. Actually, prosecuting this fraud requires a fully functioning Justice Department. But right now, there's a massive internal political standoff complicating the whole thing. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who, remember, Vance explicitly thanked for his help on the task force, is currently having his official nomination completely stalled in the Senate. And the craziest part? The holdup has absolutely nothing to do with his resume. It's entirely about a highly controversial political demand.
So, what's causing the bottleneck? It centers around a proposed $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund and certain tax audit immunities. President Trump has been pushing for this fund to compensate pardoned January 6 defendants, arguing that they were victims of government abuse. But on the other side, you've got key Republican senators, specifically John Cornyn and Tom Tillis, who are flat-out refusing to confirm Blanche until they get an ironclad written promise that this $1.8 billion fund is officially scrapped.
The friction here is super intense. Senator Tillis really did not mince words, making his hardline position crystal clear. He stated, quote, "The criminals who assaulted police officers and defiled our nation's capital are not great American patriots who are victims of government abuse. This fundamental clash over the events of January 6th has effectively paralyzed the leadership of the exact same department that's supposed to be enforcing the administration's multi-billion-dollar fraud crackdown."
So we're left with this incredibly high-stakes balancing act. On one hand, the administration has successfully spotlighted $230 billion in taxpayer fraud on a massive public stage. But on the other, you have to ask, can they actually maintain this whole-of-government momentum and prosecute these cases while their own party is totally gridlocked over the leadership of the Justice Department? When political priorities inevitably collide with these fiscal crackdowns, which one is ultimately going to win out? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. We'll see you next time.